My name is Daniel, and I've been married to Ashley for 12 years. We've been through a lot together, mostly tough times, to be honest. We've always struggled financially. I work at a factory that barely pays above minimum wage, and Ashley stays home with our two kids, Ben, 10, and Lily, 8. It's been a hand-to-mouth existence, but I thought we were doing okay because we had each other. Or at least, I thought we did. Looking back, maybe I ignored some of the signs because I wanted to believe in her, in us. Ashley has always had a sharp tongue, and she never hesitated to remind me how our life wasn't exactly her dream come true. She'd make these offhand comments about how she could have married better or deserved more. I thought she was just venting. Poverty can wear on anyone. But lately, her behavior shifted in ways that were hard to ignore. It started small. She was always on her phone, texting late at night. When I asked her who she was talking to, she brushed me off, saying it was one of her friends or none of my business. Then she started dressing up more, way more than she ever did for me, and going out for errands that took hours. I'd be at home, scrubbing dishes, wondering why errands required heels and lipstick. But the worst part? The way she started treating me, like I was invisible, or worse, a burden. Still, I wanted to believe she wasn't capable of betraying me. I thought we were a team. Until one night, when everything changed. It was a Thursday night. I'd just come home from a grueling double shift at the factory, my boots caked in grime, my back aching. The house was quiet, too quiet. Usually, the kids were still up, watching cartoons or bickering over what to eat for dinner. But this time, they were already in bed, and Ashley wasn't anywhere to be seen. Her phone, though, was lying on the kitchen counter. Now, let me be clear. I'm not the type to snoop. Even when Ashley was cold or distant, I told myself relationships are built on trust. But this time, something felt off. Maybe it was the fact that her phone, her prized possession, was left out in the open, unlocked. Or maybe it was that gnawing voice in my head that had been whispering for weeks. Something isn't right. I hesitated. My heart was already pounding, like it knew I was about to see something that would rip it to shreds. But curiosity, or desperation, won out. I picked up the phone and opened her messages. The most recent one was from someone named Matthew. Not a friend I recognized. Not one of the moms from school drop-offs or playdates. And definitely not just a coworker, like she'd mentioned once when I'd casually asked. The preview alone made my stomach drop. I miss you so much, babe. Can't wait to see you again. I stared at it for a long moment, my hands shaking. Against every instinct telling me to stop, I clicked the thread and started scrolling. The messages told me everything I didn't want to know. Matthew was rich, wealthy beyond anything Ashley and I could even imagine. He owned a successful real estate business, drove a Porsche, and lived in a gated community downtown. And Ashley? She wasn't just flirting. She was full-on in love with him. Her messages were filled with declarations of how he made her feel alive, how she'd never been happier, and how Danny, me, was out of the picture. But it got worse. So much worse. She told him I was dead. Dead. It's just me and the kids now, one message read. Danny passed away last year, but we're surviving. You've given me so much hope. The lies were so absurd. I had to reread them just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. My wife, the woman I'd shared my life with, was running around telling some rich guy I was 6 feet under, all while living under the same roof with me. Then came the photos. Selfies of her in outfits I'd never seen before. Shots of her sitting in some fancy restaurant, sipping wine and smiling like she didn't have 2 kids at home waiting for her. And one picture, a blurry mirror selfie of her in lingerie I didn't even know she owned. My heart was in my throat. I felt nauseous, like I might throw up right there on the kitchen floor. I wanted to scream, to smash the phone against the wall, to march out of the house and find her. But instead, I just stood there, clutching the counter to keep from collapsing. My whole world was crumbling, and I was too stunned to move. That's when I heard the front door open. Ashley walked in, balancing a couple of grocery bags in her arms, her face flushed from the cold night air. She didn't even glance at me as she kicked the door shut behind her and headed straight for the kitchen. Hey, she muttered, setting the bags on the counter. There's bread and eggs in the fridge. Can you start breakfast for the kids in the morning? I'm exhausted. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I was too busy staring at her, trying to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the one in those texts. Danny? She finally looked at me, a faint frown creasing her face. What's with you? You look like you've seen a ghost. My hand tightened around her phone. You want to explain this? I held it up, screen glaring with the last message she sent to Matthew. I can't wait to see you again this weekend. I'll tell the kids I have another errand. Ashley froze. For a second, her mouth opened and closed like she was scrambling for something to say, but then she spotted the phone in my hand. Her expression hardened instantly, like a switch had been flipped. Are you seriously going through my phone? She snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. That's such an invasion of privacy, Danny. Jesus Christ. Don't, I growled, my voice low and trembling with barely contained rage. Don't you dare try to make this about me. You've been lying to me, lying to our kids, lying to this Matthew guy. You told him I'm dead? Are you insane? Her face reddened, and she threw her hands in the air. Oh, come on. I knew you'd overreact. This is why I didn't tell you anything. You're always so dramatic. Dramatic? I shouted, slamming the phone onto the counter. You've been cheating on me, Ashley. You're sneaking around with some rich guy, pretending I don't exist, and I'm the one being dramatic. She rolled her eyes, like this whole thing was some minor inconvenience. Okay, fine. Yes, I've been seeing someone. So what? Do you blame me? Look at our life, Danny. We're barely scraping by. We live in this rundown house, and all you do is work yourself to death for nothing. Matthew, he's different. He's successful. He takes care of me. He actually makes me feel like I matter. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My blood boiled. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. And what about our kids, huh? Do they matter to you? Or were you planning on telling them their dad's dead too? She huffed, crossing her arms. Don't be ridiculous. I only said that to make things easier with Matthew. He's fragile. Okay? His ex-wife passed away, and he needed someone who understood loss. If he knew I was married... Stop. I cut her off, shaking my head in disbelief. You've got excuses for everything, don't you? You lied to him. You lied to me, and now you're playing the victim. Do you even hear yourself? For a moment, her bravado cracked. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked away. But then she straightened her shoulders and glared at me again. Look, Danny, I'm not doing this with you. I'm tired of your guilt trips. If you can't deal with this, that's your problem, not mine. That was it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't looking at the woman I'd married anymore. Whatever love or loyalty she once had for me was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who thought nothing of betraying her family for a fantasy. You're unbelievable, I said, my voice cold and empty. I hope he's worth it, Ashley, because you've destroyed everything. She didn't respond, just grabbed her phone off the counter and stormed past me toward the bedroom. I heard the door slam, followed by the click of the lock. I was left standing there in the middle of the kitchen, shaking with anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. Everything I thought we had, everything I'd worked for, was gone. She'd killed it with her lies. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After Ashley locked herself in the bedroom, I just stood there for what felt like hours, staring at nothing. My mind was a mess, cycling between anger, disbelief, and the sharp, gut-wrenching pain of betrayal. This was the woman I'd vowed to spend my life with, the mother of my children, and she'd lied to me, to everyone. Worse, she didn't even seem to care. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, trying to make sense of it all. But how do you make sense of finding out your wife has been pretending you're dead just to live some fantasy life with another man? Every time I closed my eyes, her words came back to haunt me. Look at our life, Danny. Do you blame me? Blame her? For what? For the sacrifices I'd made so we could survive? For the long hours I worked so our kids wouldn't go to bed hungry? For trying to keep us together when we had nothing but each other? No, this wasn't on me. It was on her. The thought of our kids, Ben and Lily, snapped me out of my spiral. They were asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of the storm raging beneath their roof. For their sake, I had to hold it together. I couldn't let them see me unravel. No matter how much it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, I made myself get up and check on them. Ben was sprawled out on his bed, snoring softly, while Lily had somehow managed to wrap herself in her blanket like a burrito. Looking at them, so peaceful and innocent, my heart ached. They didn't deserve this. They deserved a mom and dad who loved them and each other, who put them first, not whatever this mess was. I kissed each of them on the forehead and closed their doors quietly, then went back downstairs to think, or at least try to. The rest of the night was a blur. I paced the living room until my legs ached, replaying everything over and over. Ashley's betrayal, her indifference, the smug way she justified it all. And then there was Matthew. I didn't know much about him, just his name and the fact that he was rich, charming, and, apparently, clueless about the wrecking ball that was my wife. At some point, a thought began to take root. Ashley had lied to both of us, me and Matthew. She'd painted herself as some poor, widowed mother just trying to find happiness again. He didn't know she was still married, that her husband was very much alive. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not at Matthew, at least, not yet, but at Ashley for manipulating both of us. If she was going to treat me like I didn't exist, fine. I'd make sure her little house of cards came crashing down. By the time the sun started creeping through the curtains, I'd made up my mind. I was going to meet Matthew. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything else. Every time I thought about Ashley lying to Matthew, about me, about our life, I felt my blood boil. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sheer audacity of her lies. If Matthew was half the man she described him as, he deserved to know the truth. And I was going to tell him. But first, I needed to figure out how to contact him. I went back to her phone. She hadn't bothered to change the passcode, and scrolled through her messages with him. After about 15 minutes of digging, I found what I was looking for. The name of the restaurant where they were planning to meet that weekend. She'd even mentioned the time, 7:30 p.m. on Saturday. Perfect. I debated whether to call him directly. His number was right there, but decided against it. It was better to confront him in person. This wasn't the kind of thing you could explain over the phone. He needed to see my face, hear the truth, and understand just how deeply he'd been lied to. Saturday came faster than I expected, and with it, a tidal wave of nerves. I wasn't scared, exactly, but I didn't know what kind of man Matthew was. Would he believe me? Would he lash out? Or worse, would he already know about me and not care? I told Ashley I was taking the kids to my brother's house for the evening. A lie, but a necessary one. She barely acknowledged me, muttering something about how she had plans and heading off to get ready. She didn't even ask where I was going, too wrapped up in her own little world. By 7:15, I was at the restaurant. It was one of those swanky places with white tablecloths, dim lighting, and valet parking. I stuck out like a sore thumb in my worn jeans and flannel shirt, but I didn't care. I wasn't there to blend in. I asked the hostess if a Matthew Carter had a reservation. She nodded, then led me to a table tucked in a quiet corner. He was already there, sipping a glass of red wine and scrolling through his phone. He looked like I expected, polished, confident, the kind of guy who probably never worried about money a day in his life. For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. What if he dismissed me outright? But then I remembered why I was there. He deserved to know. Matthew? I asked, my voice steady but firm. He looked up, confused at first, but then he nodded. Yes? Can I help you? I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, ignoring the curious glance from a nearby server. My name's Daniel. I'm Ashley's husband. The color drained from his face. He stared at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. Her husband? He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, her husband. Alive and well, contrary to what she's been telling you. Matthew set his wine glass down with a trembling hand. Wait a minute. Ashley told me you died last year. In some kind of car accident. I laughed bitterly. Yeah, she's been telling a lot of lies. That's why I'm here. You need to know the truth. For the next 15 minutes, I laid it all out for him. Our marriage, our kids, the life Ashley had conveniently erased so she could play the role of a grieving widow. I showed him photos of the kids on my phone, pictures of us as a family. I didn't sugarcoat anything, including the fact that she'd been using him to escape the reality of our poverty. By the time I finished, Matthew looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, shaking his head in disbelief. I can't believe this. She seemed so genuine. I thought, she's a great actress. I cut in, my voice sharp. She's been playing us both. For a moment, we sat in silence. Then Matthew leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. Well, this changes everything. Yeah, it does, I agreed. So what are we going to do about it? Matthew leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table as he rubbed his temples. I could see the gears turning in his head, the same mix of anger and disbelief I'd felt when I discovered the truth. This is insane, he muttered, shaking his head. She told me everything about her struggles, her kids, how she was just trying to move on after losing you. I felt sorry for her. Hell, I admired her strength. And now I find out it's all a damn lie. Welcome to my world, I said dryly, crossing my arms. I'm not here to take pity on each other, though. I'm here because we need to figure out how to handle this. Matthew's eyes snapped up to meet mine, his expression darkening. What do you have in mind? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? Part of me wanted to let him go his own way and deal with Ashley however he saw fit. But another part, a bigger part, wanted to see her squirm. She'd been so cold, so cavalier when I confronted her. She thought she could keep lying to both of us without any consequences. That needed to change. We confront her, I said, my voice firm. Together. Matthew raised an eyebrow, skepticism written all over his face. And then what? She'll just lie her way out of it, like she always does. Not if we do it right, I countered. We catch her off guard. Force her to face both of us at the same time. She won't be able to keep her story straight when we're both there calling her out. Matthew considered this, swirling his wine absent-mindedly. Okay, he said slowly, but we can't just show up at her house. What about the kids? We won't do it at home, I said. We'll do it somewhere public. Somewhere she won't make a scene. I paused, then added with a grim smile. She's meeting you tomorrow night, right? At this restaurant? Matthew's eyes widened slightly as the realization sank in. You're suggesting I keep the date, and you show up? Exactly. For a moment, he just stared at me, weighing his options. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, let's do it. But she's not going to take this lying down. I'm counting on it, I said, standing up. Let me know what time to be here tomorrow. That night, I went home with a strange mix of dread and satisfaction. Ashley was already asleep, or pretending to be, when I walked in. I didn't bother waking her. Let her enjoy her last night thinking she'd gotten away with everything. The next day, Matthew texted me the details. 7 p.m., same table. I spent the whole day trying to keep my emotions in check. It was hard, though. Every time I thought about what was coming, I felt equal parts anticipation and anxiety. Would she try to talk her way out of it? Would she lash out? What if Matthew bailed at the last minute? By the time I arrived at the restaurant, my nerves were shot. I spotted Matthew first, already seated at the table. He gave me a slight nod as I approached. She's not here yet, he said quietly, but she texted me about 10 minutes ago. Said she's on her way. Good, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. Let's see how she handles this. At 7:10, Ashley walked in. She looked stunning, wearing a dress I'd never seen before, her hair done up like she was trying to impress royalty. For a split second, I felt a pang of something. Maybe sadness, maybe anger, but it was quickly replaced by cold determination. She didn't see me right away. Her face lit up when she spotted Matthew, and she started walking toward the table, her smile wide and confident. But then she noticed me. Her smile vanished instantly. She froze in her tracks, her eyes darting between me and Matthew like she was trying to calculate her next move. For once, she looked genuinely caught off guard. Hi, Ashley, I said, leaning back in my chair. Long time no see. Ashley stood there, frozen, her face a wild mix of shock, confusion, and panic. For once, she didn't have a quick comeback or a smug smile. She just stared at me, then at Matthew, and then back again. What is this? She stammered, her voice trembling slightly. This, I said, gesturing between me and Matthew, is what happens when the two men you've been lying to finally meet. Her face drained of color, and she clenched her purse so tightly her knuckles went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, cut the crap, Ashley, Matthew snapped, his voice cold. He's your husband. You told me he was dead. Care to explain that little detail? Ashley blinked rapidly, like her brain was scrambling to piece together an excuse. I can explain. No, I interrupted, my voice firm. No more lies, Ashley. We both know the truth now, so why don't you save yourself some time and admit it? Her eyes darted around the restaurant, as if looking for an escape route. When none appeared, she straightened her shoulders and plastered on a defiant look. Fine, she said, her voice sharp. Yes, I lied. But can you blame me? Look at my life, Danny. Look at what I have to deal with every day. Scraping by, raising two kids with barely any help, living in that dump of a house. Is it really so wrong that I wanted something better? My jaw tightened, but before I could respond, Matthew leaned forward, his expression furious. You wanted something better, so you decided to fake being a widow? Do you have any idea how disgusting that is? I trusted you, Ashley. I thought you were this incredible woman who'd been through so much, and you were just lying the whole time. Oh, please, Ashley snapped, turning her glare on him. You're not some innocent victim here, Matthew. You were happy to sweep in and save me because it made you feel like a hero. Don't act like you're above all this. Matthew recoiled slightly, but he didn't back down. That doesn't change the fact that you lied to me. About everything. About your life, your husband, your kids. Did you even care about me, or was I just your ticket out of poverty? For the first time, Ashley faltered. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her gaze falling to the floor. It's not that simple, she mumbled. It's exactly that simple, I said, my voice rising. You lied, Ashley. You lied to me, to him, and to our kids. You told some rich guy I was dead. Do you have any idea how screwed up that is? Her head snapped up, and her eyes blazed with anger. You want to talk about screwed up, Danny? How about the fact that I've been stuck in this miserable marriage for 12 years, carrying the weight of everything while you sit around playing the martyr? Maybe if you'd done something with your life, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I refused to let her see how much they hurt. You're unbelievable, I said, shaking my head. I've done everything I could to keep this family afloat, and this is how you repay me? By throwing me under the bus and lying to everyone around you? Enough, Matthew said, standing up abruptly. I'm done with this. Ashley, you and I are through. Don't call me, don't text me, don't even think about me. You're on your own. Ashley's mouth fell open, and for a moment, she looked genuinely panicked. Matthew, wait. But he was already walking away, leaving her standing there with me. The room seemed to shrink as the silence stretched between us. You've ruined everything, she hissed, her voice trembling with anger. No, I said quietly, but firmly. You did that all by yourself. After Matthew walked out, Ashley stood there, glaring at me like I was the sole reason her carefully constructed fantasy life had come crashing down. For a moment, I thought she might actually cry, but then her expression hardened into something cold and venomous. You think you've won, don't you? She spat, her voice low but sharp enough to cut glass, dragging me into this little ambush like some kind of hero. Well, congratulations, Danny. You've ruined everything. Ruined everything? I repeated, my voice rising. Ashley, you lied to everyone. To me, to him, to our kids. You're lucky I didn't blow this up in front of the whole restaurant. She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, deflecting like she always did. Oh, don't act so high and mighty. You're no saint, Danny. You're just bitter because I finally found someone who treated me like I mattered. You mean someone you manipulated with your sob story about being a widow? I shot back. Do you even hear yourself? You destroyed our family, Ashley. Not me. Her face reddened, but she didn't respond. She just grabbed her purse, turned on her heel, and marched toward the exit without another word. I didn't stop her. I didn't even watch her leave. I just sat there for a moment, staring at the empty wine glass Matthew had left behind. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt free. Hurt, yes. Angry, definitely. But free. When I got home, the kids were already asleep. I checked on them, tucking their blankets tighter around their small bodies, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of clarity. They were what mattered now. Not Ashley, not her lies, and not the wreckage of our marriage. Just them. Ashley wasn't home when I went to bed, and I didn't expect her to be. She probably needed time to figure out what to do next, now that her two worlds had collided. A part of me wondered if she'd even come back at all. Part 8. The Fallout. After Matthew walked out, Ashley stood there, glaring at me like I was the sole reason her carefully constructed fantasy life had come crashing down. For a moment, I thought she might actually cry, but then her expression hardened into something cold and venomous. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat, her voice low but sharp enough to cut glass, dragging me into this little ambush like some kind of hero. "Well, congratulations, Danny. You've ruined everything." "Ruined everything?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Ashley, you lied to everyone. To me, to him, to our kids. You're lucky I didn't blow this up in front of the whole restaurant." She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, deflecting like she always did. "Oh, don't act so high and mighty. You're no saint, Danny. You're just bitter because I finally found someone who treated me like I mattered." "You mean someone you manipulated with your sob story about being a widow?" I shot back. "Do you even hear yourself? You destroyed our family, Ashley." "Not me." Her face reddened, but she didn't respond. She just grabbed her purse, turned on her heel, and marched toward the exit without another word. I didn't stop her. I didn't even watch her leave. I just sat there for a moment, staring at the empty wine glass Matthew had left behind. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt free. Hurt, yes. Angry, definitely. But free. When I got home, the kids were already asleep. I checked on them, tucking their blankets tighter around their small bodies, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of clarity. They were what mattered now. Not Ashley, not her lies, and not the wreckage of our marriage. Just them. Ashley wasn't home when I went to bed, and I didn't expect her to be. She probably needed time to figure out what to do next, now that her two worlds had collided. A part of me wondered if she'd even come back at all. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the front door opening. Ashley's footsteps echoed through the house as she walked into the kitchen. I stayed in bed for a moment, gathering my thoughts, before finally getting up to face her. She was sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in her hands, staring blankly at the wall. For the first time, she looked tired, defeated, like she didn't have the energy to fight anymore. "We need to talk," I said, leaning against the doorway. She didn't look up. "About what? You've already made up your mind, haven't you?" I crossed my arms, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Yeah, I have. I'm done, Ashley. Whatever this is, it's over. I can't do this anymore." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and for a split second, I thought I saw something like regret. But then she laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed through the room. "Of course you're done," she said, shaking her head. "You've been looking for an excuse to leave for years. Don't think I don't know that." I took a deep breath, refusing to let her bait me. "This isn't about excuses. It's about respect, about trust. And you broke both of those." She set her coffee down with a clatter, her hands trembling. "So what now? Are you going to divorce me? Take the kids? Leave me with nothing?" "I don't want to hurt you, Ashley," I said quietly, "but I won't stay in a marriage where I'm treated like I don't exist. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure the kids are okay, but we're done." For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but then she slumped back in her chair, defeated. "Fine," she muttered. "Do whatever you want." The days after Ashley's lies unraveled were a blur of logistics and raw emotion. My head told me I needed to focus on practicalities, figuring out the next steps, protecting the kids, setting the groundwork for a life without her. But my heart wasn't so easily convinced. I swung wildly between anger and heartbreak, sometimes in the same minute. But one thing remained clear. I couldn't stay in this marriage. On Monday morning, I made my first call to a lawyer. His name was Alan Shaw, recommended by a coworker who'd been through a nasty divorce a couple of years back. Alan's voice was calm and confident on the phone, which was exactly what I needed. "Come by the office this afternoon," he said. "Bring any financial documents you have, bank statements, mortgage info, that kind of thing, and we'll go over your options." That afternoon, I found myself sitting across from Alan in his cluttered office. He was an older guy with salt and pepper hair and a demeanor that screamed, "I've seen it all." As I laid out the situation, he scribbled notes on a yellow legal pad, nodding occasionally. "Well," he said when I finished, leaning back in his chair, "it's a mess, but it's not the worst I've seen. You've got two priorities here: custody of the kids and protecting your financial interests." "I want the kids with me," I said firmly. "Ashley's been lying to them, just like she's been lying to everyone else. They need stability, and she's not going to give them that." Alan nodded. "You've got a strong case for primary custody, especially if you can prove she's been neglectful or putting them in situations that aren't in their best interest. Did she ever leave them alone to meet this guy?" I thought back, piecing together the timeline of her outings and errands. "I don't think so," I admitted. "But she was emotionally absent. The kids have been asking why she's always gone, why she doesn't spend time with them. I know they felt it." Alan made a note. "That's good to bring up. Judges care about emotional neglect too. As for the financials, how much do you two have in joint assets?" "Not much," I admitted. "We're barely scraping by. The house is under both our names, but it's not worth much. Most of our money goes to bills." "That simplifies things a bit," Alan said. "We'll focus on the custody arrangement first. If you're serious about this, I can file the paperwork for temporary custody by the end of the week. Once she's served, you'll need to have a plan in place for how to handle things at home." I left his office with a mix of relief and dread. The wheels were in motion, but there was no turning back now. The hardest part of all this was talking to the kids. I'd been putting it off, hoping I could shield them from the worst of it, but I knew they deserved honesty. That night, I sat them down in the living room, my heart pounding as I tried to find the right words. "Ben, Lily," I began, my voice shaky. "There's something I need to tell you about me and Mom." Ben, ever the perceptive one, frowned immediately. "Are you guys getting a divorce?" Lily's eyes widened, and she clutched her stuffed bunny to her chest. "Why? Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetie," I said quickly, pulling her into my lap. "This isn't your fault. This is between me and Mom. We've had some problems, and we've decided it's better if we live apart for a while." Ben's expression darkened. "So you're leaving us?" "Never," I said firmly. "You two are the most important people in my life. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're okay, no matter what happens." Lily sniffled, her little hands clutching my shirt. "I don't want you to go, Daddy." "I'm not going anywhere," I promised her. "And I'm always going to be here for you, no matter what." Ben stayed quiet after that, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. It killed me, knowing how much this was going to affect them, but I also knew staying in a toxic marriage would only make things worse. Later that night, as I sat in the quiet of the living room, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't consumed by anger or confusion. I was focused on what mattered: my kids, my future, and rebuilding a life that didn't include Ashley's lies. The days after I filed the custody paperwork felt like I was walking on a tightrope over a pit of fire. Every step was cautious, deliberate, but no matter how careful I was, the heat of the situation was always there, licking at my heels. Ashley hadn't been served yet, and the tension in the house was suffocating. She could tell something was coming, but I hadn't let on exactly what. The kids were doing their best to act normal, but they were clearly confused. Ben barely spoke to me unless it was about school or homework, and Lily clung to me constantly, like she was afraid I'd disappear if she let go. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was at home with the kids when there was a knock at the door. Ashley had just gotten back from one of her errands and was in the kitchen when she opened it. I didn't even have to see her face to know what was happening. The low, venomous tone of her voice said it all. "Are you kidding me?" she hissed. storming into the living room with the papers in hand. "You're really going through with this?" I stayed seated, doing my best to look calm, even though my heart was pounding. "Yeah, Ashley, I am. You left me no choice." Her face twisted into a mask of fury. "You're such a coward, Danny. You couldn't even talk to me about this? You had to send a lawyer to do your dirty work?" "There's nothing to talk about," I said evenly. "You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." She scoffed, tossing the papers onto the coffee table. "You think you're going to take the kids from me? Good luck with that. I'm their mother, Danny. No judge is going to side with you." I stood up, meeting her glare with one of my own. "We'll see. I've already talked to a lawyer, and I'm ready to fight for what's best for Ben and Lily. If that means going to court, so be it." She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Lily wandered into the room, clutching her stuffed bunny. "What's wrong, Mommy?" Ashley's face softened instantly, and she knelt down to pull Lily into a hug. "Nothing, sweetie," she said, her voice suddenly syrupy sweet. "Daddy and I are just having a little disagreement, but it's nothing you need to worry about." The sheer hypocrisy of it made me want to scream, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to let her use the kids as pawns in this mess. Over the next few weeks, things got ugly. Ashley fought me every step of the way, filing her own motion for primary custody and claiming that I wasn't emotionally available for the kids because of my long work hours. She painted herself as the perfect mother, conveniently leaving out her lies, her affair, and her constant absence. Alan was a godsend during this time, keeping me focused and helping me gather evidence to counter her claims. I printed out text messages, pulled bank statements showing how much of our limited income had been spent on her errands, and even got statements from the kids' teachers about who was more involved in their school lives. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to show the court the truth. One day, out of the blue, I got a call from Matthew. I hadn't heard from him since the night of the confrontation, and I wasn't sure what to expect. "Danny," he said, his tone measured but serious, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. I had no idea Ashley was lying about you or your kids. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know." I was stunned. "Thanks, Matthew," I said after a moment. "Actually, there might be something you can do." I explained the custody battle and asked if he'd be willing to provide a statement about Ashley's lies and behavior. To my surprise, he agreed without hesitation. "She played me," he said bitterly. "The least I can do is make sure she doesn't play the court too." The hardest part of this whole ordeal was talking to Ben and Lily about what was happening. They deserved honesty, but I struggled to find the right balance between telling them the truth and protecting them from the ugliness of it all. One night, after dinner, I sat them down again. "Guys," I began, my voice steady but soft. "You know Mom and I are having some problems, right?" They nodded, their expressions wary. "Well, part of those problems means we're going to have to go to court to figure out what's best for you two. It's not because we don't love you. It's because we love you so much that we both want what's best for you." Ben frowned. "But why can't you just figure it out without a court?" "Because sometimes adults need help making big decisions," I said. "But no matter what happens, I promise you this. You're going to be okay. We'll figure this out together." The day of the custody hearing felt like a storm was brewing inside me. An anxious, churning mix of fear, anger, and determination. I'd spent weeks preparing with Alan, gathering evidence, practicing what to say, and bracing myself for whatever Ashley would throw at me. But nothing could fully prepare you for standing in front of a judge while your entire life was dissected. Ashley walked into the courtroom looking calm and composed, wearing a dress that screamed, "Responsible mother." She avoided my gaze as she sat across the aisle from me, her lawyer whispering in her ear. I didn't look at her for long. I was too focused on the task ahead. Ashley's lawyer went first, painting her as a loving, attentive mother who had always put her children first. He leaned heavily on the narrative that I was too distracted by work to provide emotional support for the kids and suggested that their stability would be better maintained with her as the primary caregiver. I clenched my fists under the table, biting my tongue as he twisted the truth into something almost unrecognizable. When it was Alan's turn, he didn't hold back. He calmly but firmly laid out the facts. Ashley's frequent absences her neglectful behavior, and, most damning of all, the lies she told to sustain her affair. He presented copies of the text messages and financial records, painting a picture of a woman who had prioritized her own desires over her children's well-being. "Mr. Walker isn't here to tear down Ms. Walker," Alan concluded. "He's here because he believes his children deserve better. And the evidence speaks for itself." Ashley went first. She spoke confidently, spinning a tale of a struggling but dedicated mother who had done her best under difficult circumstances. She didn't directly address the affair, instead focusing on my long work hours and claiming she had stepped up to fill the gaps I'd left behind. When it was my turn, I stuck to the truth. I talked about the sacrifices I'd made to provide for our family, the time I spent with Ben and Lily despite my long hours, and my commitment to giving them the stability they deserved. Then came the bombshell, Matthew. I hadn't told Ashley he was going to testify, so when he walked into the courtroom, her face went pale. He took the stand and calmly recounted the lies she told him, about me, about our marriage, about her life. His voice was steady, but the anger in his eyes was unmistakable. "She told me her husband was dead," he said. "She manipulated me into believing she was a grieving widow when, in reality, she was married and using me to escape her life. I trusted her, and she betrayed me. If she lied to me, I can only imagine what else she's lied about." Ashley's lawyer tried to discredit him, suggesting he was just a bitter ex. But Matthew's testimony was too damning to ignore. Combined with the evidence Alan presented, it painted a picture that was impossible to deny. After hours of arguments and testimonies, the judge finally delivered his verdict. He awarded me primary custody of Ben and Lily, with Ashley granted supervised visitation until she could demonstrate a commitment to putting the kids first. The relief was overwhelming. I wanted to cry, to scream, to hug my kids and never let go. But I kept my composure as the judge finalized his decision. This was just the beginning. After all, there was still so much work to do. Ashley didn't say a word to me as we left the courtroom. She looked furious, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. I didn't care. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about my kids and giving them the stability they needed. That night, I sat down with Ben and Lily and told them the news. "You're going to be staying with me from now on," I said. "Mom will still see you, but things are going to be different for a while." Ben nodded solemnly, his maturity showing through despite his young age. Lily clung to my arm, whispering, "I'm glad, Daddy." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I felt like I was on solid ground. Securing custody of Ben and Lily felt like a victory, but it was just the start of a new chapter, a chapter filled with challenges I hadn't even begun to anticipate. Being a single father wasn't something I ever thought I'd have to do, but now it was my reality, and I was determined to do it right. The house felt different without Ashley around. Quieter, in some ways, but also heavier. The kids asked about her constantly. When they'd see her, why she wasn't staying with us anymore. I gave them honest answers as best I could. "Mom loves you, but she and I aren't together anymore. You'll see her soon, though." Supervised visitation began 2 weeks after the court ruling. Ashley met with the kids at a local community center, under the watchful eye of a court-appointed supervisor. It wasn't ideal, but it was what the judge had ordered. I could tell Ben and Lily were confused by the arrangement, but they seemed to adjust quicker than I expected. Kids are resilient like that. As for me, I threw myself into the role of single dad with everything I had. Mornings were a whirlwind of getting them fed, dressed, and off to school before heading to work. Evenings were a blur of homework, dinner, and bedtime routines. It was exhausting, but it felt good, real, like I was finally doing something that mattered. The first time I went grocery shopping without Ashley, I stood in the cereal aisle for 10 minutes, staring blankly at the shelves. It wasn't just about choosing between Frosted Flakes and Cheerios. It was the realization that I was now the only one making decisions about our family. Everything, big or small, was on me. It was overwhelming at times. The weight of responsibility, the financial strain, the loneliness of coming home to an empty bed. But I kept reminding myself why I was doing this. For Ben and Lily, they needed me to be strong, even when I felt like I was barely holding it together. For every challenge, there were moments of joy that made it all worthwhile. Like the time Lily hugged me out of the blue and said, "You're the best dad ever." Or the night Ben asked me to help him with a science project, and we ended up laughing so hard we woke Lily up. I started to notice changes in them, too. Ben became more talkative, more open about his feelings. Lily, who had always been a little shy, started coming out of her shell. It was like they were finally feeling safe, and that made every sleepless night worth it. One of the biggest surprises came from Matthew. After his testimony in court, I thought I'd never hear from him again, but he reached out a few weeks later. "Hey, Danny," he said over the phone. "I just wanted to check in. How are you and the kids holding up?" To my surprise, we started talking regularly. He even offered to help in ways I hadn't expected, like covering part of the kids' extracurricular fees when money was tight. At first, I resisted, but he insisted. "It's the least I can do after everything that happened," he said. It was strange, having this unlikely ally. But I realized Matthew wasn't the villain I'd imagined him to be. He'd been just as blindsided by Ashley's lies as I had, and in some ways, he'd lost just as much. One night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, thinking about everything that had happened. The pain of Ashley's betrayal was still there, but it was starting to feel less like a wound and more like a scar. A part of my story, but not the whole thing. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I'd do whatever it took to give Ben and Lily the life they deserved. A life built on love, honesty, and stability. A life where they knew they were the most important thing in the world. As the weeks turned into months, the chaos started to settle. The routines I'd scrambled to build for Ben and Lily became second nature. Work was still exhausting, money was still tight, but for the first time in what felt like forever, the fog of uncertainty began to lift. I could see a future, not the one I'd imagined when I married Ashley, but a new one. And maybe, just maybe, it could be better. It's amazing how much of yourself you lose in a toxic relationship. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being Danny and had become nothing more than Ashley's husband, or the dad who's always working. But with her gone, I had room to think about who I was, who I wanted to be. One evening, after the kids were asleep, I found myself digging through an old box in the attic. Inside were photos, mementos, and things I hadn't touched in years. At the bottom of the box was my guitar. I hadn't played since college, but something made me pick it up that night. The strings were dusty, the sound a little off, but as I strummed the chords of a song I used to love, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: joy. It became a ritual after that. Once the kids were in bed, I'd sit on the porch and play. It was small, but it was mine. A reminder that there was more to me than just the roles I played for everyone else. I'd always thought of myself as the guy who got by on his own. Asking for help felt like admitting defeat. But after everything I'd been through, I realized I couldn't do this alone. To my surprise, when I started reaching out, people showed up. Ben's football coach offered to give him extra rides to practice so I didn't have to miss work. My neighbor, Mrs. Perkins, started bringing over casseroles just because. Even Matthew stayed in touch, checking in on the kids and occasionally dropping off supplies for their school projects. It wasn't just about the practical help, though. It was about feeling like I wasn't alone. For the first time, I realized that community wasn't just a buzzword. It was something real, something that could make all the difference. The kids were thriving in ways I hadn't expected. Ben threw himself into football, channeling his energy into something positive. He even came to me one night, grinning from ear to ear, and said, "Coach says I might make captain next year." Lily, meanwhile, started showing a creative streak. She spent hours drawing and painting, turning her room into a mini art studio. One day, she handed me a picture of the three of us, a simple crayon drawing, but it brought tears to my eyes. Underneath, she'd written in her careful, blocky handwriting, "My family." They still asked about Ashley sometimes, especially Lily. I did my best to answer their questions honestly without tearing their mom down. "She loves you both very much," I'd say. "She's just figuring some things out right now." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was the best I could do. One Saturday, while I was taking the kids to a local park, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, Lisa, an old friend from high school. She was there with her niece, pushing her on the swings. When she saw me, her face lit up in recognition. "Danny, is that you?" We spent the next hour catching up, talking about everything from our kids to the ridiculousness of high school drama.